Welcome, sleepy soul. I'll be your storyteller tonight, guiding you gently toward deep, peaceful rest. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime tales. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, and if there's a story you'd like next, I'd love to hear it. I wasn't planning on leaving the highway that night. I'd been driving since late afternoon, trying to shave a couple hours off the trip so I wouldn't have to pay for another motel. I do IT field work, mostly server installs and emergency callouts, so long drives and late nights are part of the job. I don't drink, I don't party, and Halloween has never meant much to me beyond cheap candy at gas stations. The GPS told me to stay on the main route, but the construction signs and blinking detour arrows had other ideas. I ended up following a series of orange cones onto a narrow county road that threaded through open fields and dense tree lines. The last bit of sun was fading in the rearview mirror. The sky ahead was a deep indigo, the kind that never looks fully black because of distant town glow, except out there were no towns. Just miles and miles of nothing. My radio had given up on music stations a while back. Just static and faint voices. So it was me, the hum of the engine, and the soft slap of the wipers smearing bug guts across the windshield every now and then. The air coming through the cracked window was cold enough to sting my cheeks. I could smell damp soil, fallen leaves, that slightly metallic scent you get before a hard frost. My headlights carved a tunnel through low-hanging branches, and every so often I'd catch a glimpse of a crooked fence, a rusted mailbox, a patch of corn long since harvested. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:42 p.m. Halloween night. I remember thinking, randomly, that I hadn't seen a single trick-or-treater, a single decoration, nothing. Just dead fields and darker woods. That's when I heard the bell. It was faint at first, like it was carried from far away on the wind. A single, clear toll that cut through the hum of the tires. I thought I imagined it, but then it rang again. A deep, old-fashioned church bell sound. Not the recorded chime of some suburban clock tower, but something heavier, fuller. It seemed to roll across the fields and sink into my chest. I slowed a little and turned down the radio completely, just in case. Static vanished. Engine noise settled into a low growl. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then bong. Closer this time. It was off to my left, beyond the tree line. I leaned slightly towards the window, but all I could see were trunks and branches, pale gray bark in my high beams, a darkness behind them that swallowed everything else. Another toll exactly 5 minutes later. I know because I checked the time without really meaning to. 11:47 p.m. I should have just kept driving. Instead, I saw the sign. It was old and wooden, half swallowed by weeds at the side of a faded side road. A narrow strip of cracked pavement that turned off the county route and disappeared into the trees. My headlights picked up white hand-painted letters, flaking but still legible. WELCOMETOBELLTOWN. Below that, someone had painted a little church shape with a bell in the steeple. No population number, no county marker, nothing official. Just that name. And right on cue, bong. Closer. Much closer. I don't know what I was thinking. Curiosity, maybe. That stupid human need to prove to yourself that nothing weird is actually happening. I told myself there'd be a gas station, or at least some porch lights, some sign of life. Maybe I could ask for directions back to the highway instead of trusting the GPS, which was already flickering in and out with a signal lost notification. So I turned. The tires crunched over loose gravel at the edge, then found the cracked blacktop. Trees arched over the road, branches knitting overhead into a tunnel that swallowed even the faint starlight. I eased off the gas, letting the car roll forward at maybe 20 miles an hour. The bell rang again as I drove deeper. It felt like it was coming from directly ahead now, beyond the curve of the road. Deep, resonant, slow. And each time it rang, the air felt thicker, like the temperature dropped another degree. My breath fogged slightly in front of my lips, even with the vents still blowing lukewarm air. I noticed something else. No cell phone service. 0 bars. After maybe 5 minutes, the trees thinned out, and I rolled into what should have been a town. Rows of houses appeared on either side of the road, the silhouettes of porches and chimneys, peaked roofs and sagging gutters. My headlights slid across peeling paint, boarded-up windows, porches cluttered with warped rocking chairs and broken flower pots. The asphalt widened into a main street with a cracked double yellow line. An old barber's pole stood outside a shop with frosted glass. A diner with a flickering, dead neon sign. A general store with a hand-painted open sign hanging crookedly in the window, even though everything inside was still. But there were no lights, no cars parked, no porch lamps, no TVs flickering behind curtains. Just dust and shadows. My tires sounded too loud against the pavement. Every little pebble and crack echoed up through the frame, into my hands on the steering wheel. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I saw the church. It stood at the end of the street like someone had set it on a stage. White clapboard siding, a narrow steeple, a simple wooden door. The steeple window was empty, but I could see the shape of the bell inside. A dark, heavy shape suspended from a beam. The bell rang again as I rolled to a stop. This time I saw it swing. Only a little. A lazy rock, back and forth, like it was being pulled by a rope I couldn't see. No, not couldn't see, there was a rope. A frayed, thick rope hanging down through a gap in the side, swaying slightly as if invisible hands had just tugged it. I put the car in park without even realizing I'd done it. The silence that followed was different. Not just the absence of sound, but a pressure, like the whole place was holding its breath. My headlights washed over the church doors, the cracked steps, the windows on either side. The glass was so dusty, it looked almost painted over. There's no one here, I told myself. It's dead. An old ghost town with a bell on a timer or something. Wind, gravity, old mechanisms still doing their thing. But the air didn't move. Not even the smallest breeze stirred the weeds along the sidewalk. The bell rope swayed once more, small and purposeful, then went still. I should have reversed and left, but I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my phone, just out of habit. No signal. The time read 11:59 p.m. 1 minute to midnight. I don't know what rule got triggered in my brain. Some combination of curiosity, boredom, and that little kid thrill of doing something you know you shouldn't. I told myself I'd just step out, look around, maybe take a picture, tell the story later. Hey, I found this creepy abandoned town on Halloween. I opened the car door. The cold hit me first. Not the gentle autumn chill from before, but a sharp, damp cold that slid instantly down the back of my neck. The smell changed too. Outside the car, the air reeked of dust and old wood, like a house that had been closed up for decades. Underneath that was something else. Faint, metallic, like pennies on your tongue. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped onto the street. The sound was swallowed almost immediately, like the town didn't want echoes. I walked slowly toward the church, stuffing my hands into my jacket pockets to stop them from shaking. Each breath came out in a pale mist. The street lamps lining the road were old-fashioned black iron posts. None of them were lit. My own shadow stretched ahead of me, thin and warped in my headlights. As I passed the first row of houses, I felt it. The sensation of being watched. It was subtle at first, just a prickling along the back of my neck. I tried to dismiss it as nerves, but the closer I got to the church, the stronger it became, like 100 invisible eyes were following each step. I made the mistake of glancing at the houses. Behind the dusty windows, the darkness seemed thicker, like something was standing just beyond the glass. A shape here, a suggestion of movement there. Not clear enough to see, just implied. I forced myself to keep my eyes forward, focusing on the church door. The bell tolled. Midnight. The sound hit me like a physical shove. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. The bell swung higher this time, the rope jerking like someone was hauling on it with real weight. The air vibrated in my lungs. As the last note faded, a second sound crept into the silence. A soft creak came from my left, then my right, then ahead of me, like a wave. One by one, the front doors of the houses along the street eased open. Just a few inches at first, then wider. The hinges groaned in protest, long and used. I watched in numb disbelief as every door on that street slowly swung inward, exposing dark, yawning interiors. Behind my back, I heard more doors opening on side streets, unseen. The town wasn't holding its breath anymore. It was waking up. The watching sensation sharpened, turned almost tangible. My skin crawled. My legs finally remembered how to move, and I turned on my heel, walking fast back to the car. Not running. Not yet. I told myself if I ran, whatever was there would react. Like an animal. Don't look at the windows, I thought. Don't. I looked. Shapes were closer now. Pale smudges against the dark interiors, clustered just behind the thresholds, just inside the doorways. Not fully formed. Not faces. Just the hint of presence. The impression of crowds pressing forward but never stepping out. My walk became a jog. Gravel skittered under my boots. My breath came faster, fogging the air. The car looked too far away. Headlights slicing the street, taillights glowing softly, like it was part of some other world. The bell rang again. I didn't hear it so much as feel it in my spine. The doors that had already opened shuddered slightly, as if straining against invisible hands. I heard a whisper of movement from inside the houses, fabric brushing wood, bare feet on floorboards, dozens of tiny sounds layered together into a soft, hungry rustle. I ran. I slammed into the side of my car hard enough to make the frame rock. My hand fumbled the handle, slick with sweat despite the cold. I yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming it shut with a hollow thud that sounded pathetically small against the vast silence outside. I grabbed the keys and froze. The windshield. For the first time since I'd stepped out, I looked at the glass. Handprints. They were everywhere. Dozens of them, smeared across the windshield and side windows, overlapping in streaks and arcs. Some small, like a child's. Others longer, with fingers that seemed just a little too thin, too many joints. The prints were fresh, still sliding slowly downward like something wet was drying. They glistened faintly in the headlights. Not quite mud, not quite condensation. Something in between. My stomach lurched. I hadn't heard anyone touch the car. I hadn't heard anything at all. They touched it while I was walking toward the church, while my back was turned. I jammed the keys into the ignition with shaking hands and twisted hard. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the engine roared to life, too loud, too sudden. The handprints seemed to pulse in the light, as if reacting. The bell tolled again. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the cracked pavement. The steering wheel fought me as I swung the rear around, then slammed it into drive and floored it. The car leapt forward, engine whining, gravel spraying. As I sped down the main street, I caught glimpses of those open doors. They were wider now. The darkness inside looked thicker, almost textured, as if something was crowding just beyond the threshold, pressing against invisible glass, stretching the edges of reality thin. The watching sensation spiked, so intense my eyes watered. I didn't look again. The trees swallowed me as I flew down the side road, branches whipping past in a blur. The bell rang once more behind me, distant but still clear, like it had been engraved into the air. It didn't stop ringing for a long time. Even when the town vanished behind me, even when I hit the county road and then, finally, the main highway, I could still hear it in my head. Every 5 minutes, like a clock tolling down to something I didn't want to understand. I didn't see another car until almost 1 a.m. By then, the handprints had faded. I know how that sounds. I watched them shrink and blur as if someone was wiping them away from the inside of the glass. When I finally pulled into a 24-hour gas station, shaking and wide-eyed, there were only faint streaks left, easily mistaken for dirt or condensation. I asked the cashier if he'd ever heard of a place called Belltown. He frowned, thought for a second, then shook his head. "No towns that way for at least 50 miles, man," he said. "Just farms and empty land. You sure you didn't read an old sign or something?" I pulled out my phone to show him. The GPS history showed my route along the county road, but there was no side road, no turnoff, no little spur disappearing into the trees, just a straight line. If that was the end of it, Maybe I could have convinced myself I'd been tired, half dreaming. Chalk it up to some weird mix of fog and stress and Halloween nerves. But a week later, back home, I woke up in the middle of the night to complete silence. No fridge hum, no distant cars, no wind, just stillness. And then I heard it. A single, clear bell toll, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere beyond my street, beyond my neighborhood, rolling in from the dark like a slow wave. I checked the time, 12 a.m. My house is nowhere near a church. And sometimes, when I'm stopped at a red light after dark, or parked in an empty lot, I catch myself glancing at the windshield, half expecting to see fresh handprints sliding slowly down the glass, like the town is still out there somewhere, like it knows I heard the bell. I still smell it sometimes. Not the carved pumpkin, cinnamon candle Halloween smell everyone loves. I mean the other one, the sweet, wet stink of something that rotted from the inside out. It'll hit me out of nowhere. Walking past a grocery store display in October, or driving by a farm stand, and suddenly I'm not where I think I am anymore. I'm back on that road. Pumpkin Rot Road. I was 17 that Halloween. Senior year. I wasn't a bad kid, just bored. We lived in the kind of town where the biggest thrill on a Saturday night was either driving in circles around the same two streets or sneaking into the woods to drink warm beer and pretend you weren't freezing. That night, Tyler had borrowed his dad's Jeep. There were 4 of us crammed inside. Tyler driving, Jess riding shotgun, me and Marco in the back. We were supposed to be heading to this house party 2 towns over. Someone's older brother had a kegerator and a bonfire, and that was enough to get half our school to show up. I remember the glow of the dashboard, the way the heat only really reached our legs, leaving our faces kind of numb from the cold. I remember the rattle of the loose change in the cup holder every time Tyler hit a bump, and the thin, tinny Halloween playlist coming off his phone, old Misfits, some cheesy sound effects. We missed the exit. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. No worries, I'll cut across, Tyler said, already veering onto a smaller road. The GPS recalced, the digital line on the screen shivering and redrawing itself. Out the windows, the world got darker and emptier. Houses gave way to fields. Fields gave way to patches of woods. The pavement narrowed. I don't like this, Jess muttered after a while, rubbing her hands together. Feels like a setup for a horror movie. Relax, Marco said, leaning forward between the seats. Worst case, we end up in some creepy cornfield and Tyler gets murdered first. Why me first? He laughed. Because you're driving, I said. Final girl rules. You're screwed. We were still laughing about that when we saw the sign. It was barely in the headlights long enough to process. Metal instead of wood, leaning sideways like something had clipped it years ago. The letters were ghost white, flaked and faded, but we could still make them out. Pumpkin Rot RD. That's weirdly specific, Jess said. Dude, we have to go down that, Marco said immediately. Come on. Pumpkin Rot Road? On Halloween, it's like destiny. I should have said no. I should have told Tyler to stay on the main road, to ignore the stupid name, to just get us back to somewhere with streetlights and normal smells. But I didn't. 5 minutes, Tyler said, grinning. We go, we take a couple pictures, we turn around. Haunted Instagram content. Boom. The turnoff was barely more than 2 cracked lanes of asphalt disappearing between skeletal trees. The Jeep bumped as the tires rolled over from smoother pavement to this older, forgotten stuff. Tyler killed the music. Gotta hear the ghosts, he joked. It got quiet. The kind of quiet where you realize how loud your world usually is. Airplanes, distant cars, someone's TV through thin walls. Out there, we had the rumble of the engine, the crunch of gravel, and nothing else. No crickets. No wind through the branches. Just a stillness that pressed against the windows. The first pumpkin we saw was on the right-hand side of the road. The headlights slid across it and my brain tried to file it under normal, fall decorations, some farmer's leftover jack-o'-lantern. But it wasn't carved. It was shredded. Deep gouges ripped through its skin and flesh like something had hooked into it and dragged backward, tearing it open. Strings of pulp hung loose, gray and dried in the cold air. Damn, Tyler said under his breath. Raccoon must have gone at it. Raccoons don't have fingers, Jess said quietly. More pumpkins appeared as we rolled forward. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They lined the ditches and spilled across the yards that began to appear on either side, houses small and squat, half buried in creeping vines. Not cute, round pumpkins. These were sagging, slumped things, collapsed under their own decay. Their skin was mottled white and black, mold blooming in soft circles. Every single one looked violated. Not a single clean carving. Just claw marks, rents, holes punched straight through. The smell hit a second later. It seeped in through the vents and tiny cracks around the doors. A dense, cloying rot. Sickly sweet and damp, like a compost heap left to steam and fester. I tasted it on the back of my tongue. My eyes watered. Guys, Jess said, covering her nose with her sleeve. Let's just turn around. Road's too narrow, Tyler said, but his voice had lost its joking edge. I'll find a driveway. The road opened into what must have been the town center, or what was left of it. A cracked intersection. A few buildings collapsed in on themselves. A rusted swing set leaning sideways in a patch of dead grass. And pumpkins, everywhere, clustering around porch steps, filling the gaps between broken boards, lumped together in piles like bodies. I leaned forward, pressing my palm against the cold glass. The vines were thickest here, a network of braided green and brown snaking through the streets, over fences, up telephone poles that no longer carried wires. They didn't move, but something about the way they lay there made my skin crawl. They looked too deliberate, like veins. Dude, stop, Marco said suddenly. Let's take a pic. Tyler pulled the Jeep to a hesitant stop near what used to be a general store. The paint on the sign had peeled off in long curls, leaving only faint shapes. The windows were opaque with dust, but I could see shapes stacked behind them. Not shelves, not products, more pumpkins. 5 minutes, Jess said. I'm serious. Then we go. The cold slapped me in the face when I opened the door. Felt heavier out there, like the air itself was thicker. The smell of rot was so strong it settled in my clothes, my hair, sticky and sour. My boots sank into damp soil where the asphalt had given up years ago. Underfoot, I felt the faint rubbery give of vines. The sky had gone that bruised purple between sunset and full dark. No stars yet, no moon, just the fading afterglow behind the trees, painting everything in shades of blue and black. Okay, line up, Tyler said, stepping around to the front of the Jeep, phone held out. I'm tagging this pumpkin rot road, and if that isn't already a creepypasta, I'll be disappointed. We backed up onto what used to be the sidewalk, careful not to trip. The pumpkins nearest us were the worst of all. Split open, hollowed in ways that didn't look natural. The gouges in their flesh were too clean, too deep. Some of them had patterns, scratches that almost looked like symbols if you squinted. 1, 2. Something twitched near my foot. I froze, the word 3 dying in my throat. At first I thought I'd imagined it, just my brain making stuff up because I was freaked out. But then I felt it again. The vine under my boot pulsed. Just once. A faint, slow throb, like a heartbeat through rubber. Then it went still. Guys, I said, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. Do you feel that? Feel what? Marco said. He was grinning, but it didn't reach his eyes. The ground, I shifted my foot to step back. That's when I heard the crunch. It was soft but distinct. The wet crackle of something giving way. I looked down just in time to see the pumpkin under my heel burst. Warm. Wet pulp exploded out around my boot, splashing my jeans, my hands. Strings of slimy orange flesh stuck to my fingers. But it wasn't just seeds and guts. A cloud of something rose from the ruined pumpkin. A dense, shimmering puff of dust and vapor that rolled up my leg and straight into my face. I inhaled by reflex. The spores were warm. That's the part that still makes me want to claw my lungs out when I think about it. They didn't feel like dust. They felt like breath, like exhaled air pouring into me. My throat burned. My eyes slammed shut on their own, tears squeezing out at the corners. I stumbled backward, coughing so hard I thought I'd throw up. The taste was bitter and earthy and wrong, like eating ash soaked in syrup. Behind the coughing, behind the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears, something else slid in, whispering. At first I thought it was Jess yelling or Marco laughing, but it wasn't coming from them. It wasn't coming from outside at all. It was inside, a chorus of tiny, sibilant voices curling in my head, layered over each other like wind through dry grass. I heard my name, not shouted, not spoken, breathed. Nate! Jess grabbed my arm. Her fingers were ice cold, digging into my jacket. Are you okay? Nate, are you? I jerked away from her without meaning to. The whispers surged at the sound of my name again, overlapping, swelling. They were all saying different things, too fast to catch. But the tone was clear, hungry, excited. Something brushed my ankle. I looked down. The vines were moving. No breeze, no quake, just the slow, deliberate slither of growth. Tendrils that had been lying limp moments before were now coiling around my boots, sliding over each other, braiding. Tiny hair-like roots reached out and latched onto the scuffed rubber, gripping, tightening. Tyler, Marco said, voice cracking. Start the Jeep. I tried to step back, but my foot wouldn't come up. The vine held. I could feel the pressure around my ankle now, a constricting band, tightening with patient strength. Another vine snaked around my other leg, higher this time, aiming for skin. The town seemed to exhale. All around us, the pumpkins began to crack. Soft pops and wet splits echoed off the dead storefronts, a grotesque chorus. Each burst released another cloud of those shimmering spores, rising in slow-motion plumes, catching the last of the light. The whispers got louder, spilling out of the broken shells, out of the twitching vines, out of the ground itself. Nate, Jess, Tyler, Marco. Hearing your own name in that voice is like hearing someone whisper it directly into your ear in the dark. Too close, intimate in the worst way. Get in the car, Jess screamed. Tyler was already scrambling for the driver's seat, half slipping on vines that were starting to cross the road in tangled webs. The Jeep's engine coughed, then roared, headlights flaring brighter. For a second, they lit up the center of town. That's when I saw it. The vines all flowed in one direction. Every tendril, every creeping line of green and brown, was drawn toward the same point a block away, in what used to be a town square. The soil there wasn't flat. It rose and fell in a slow, barely visible swell, like something enormous was breathing beneath it. The pumpkins were thickest there, piled in rings around an invisible center, their rotting guts feeding the earth. The whispers were loudest in that direction. Not words now, just this throbbing, eager murmur. Something was underneath the town. Something that the vines were connected to. Something that had just noticed us. The vines around my ankles jerked, yanking me forward so hard I nearly went down. I caught myself on a mailbox, rust flaking off under my fingers, the metal icy cold. Pain flared in my legs as the vines tightened, pulling, dragging me inch by inch toward the square. Hold on, Marco shouted. He lunged toward me, grabbing my jacket. For a second, it was a tug of war, him pulling one way, the vines pulling the other. My skin burned under the pressure. I felt something pop in my left ankle. The whispers rose in a furious hiss. Jess did the only smart thing anyone did that night. She flicked her lighter. The flame looked pathetically small in the growing dark, a little orange tongue trembling in the cold air. She didn't aim at the vines, though. She aimed at the pumpkin I'd crushed. It was still leaking pulp, seeds glistening like wet teeth. The surface around the shattered shell was slick and slimy. Jess touched the flame to one of the exposed streaks of flesh. Caught. There was no way it should have. Pumpkins are wet. Green vines don't burn like dry brush. But the slime sizzled, then flared, orange and green fire racing along the stringy guts like someone had poured gasoline through the plant's veins. The flame shot out along the nearest vine, then forked, splitting down every tendril it touched. In seconds, fire ran in lines across the ground, outlining the hidden network beneath our feet in blazing arteries. The vines around my legs spasmed. The grip loosened just enough. Marco yanked, and I felt skin tear under the constriction, a bright hot pain ripping up my calves. I stumbled free, nearly crashing into him. Behind us, the fire was spiderwebbing through the town, lighting up the pumpkins from within as they ignited one by one. The whispers turned into screams. Not human screams. Not exactly. More like the sound of 1,000 mouths inhaling sharply at once and not exhaling. A drawn-out, furious intake of breath that shook the air. We ran. I don't remember getting into the Jeep. One second I was on the street, the next I was in the back seat, half on top of Jess, the smell of burning rot pouring in through every crack. Tyler floored it. The tires spun uselessly for a horrible heartbeat, vines wrapping around the wheels, then snapped free as the rubber finally caught. As we tore down Pumpkin Rot Road, I looked back. The town was on fire, but not the way normal things burn. The flames were low and crawling, hugging the lines of the vines. The houses stayed dark. The swing set stood untouched. Only the pumpkins and their roots burned, a slow, deliberate blaze. The ground at the center of town was heaving now, rising higher with each breath. For one moment, in the flickering light, I saw something push against the surface from below. A bulge, a swell, the hint of something round and vast and straining. Whatever it was, the fire hadn't reached it yet. Then the trees closed in and I couldn't see it anymore. We didn't talk until we hit the main highway. We didn't call the police. What would we have said? Hey, there's a monster made of pumpkins under an abandoned town? We didn't go to the hospital either. Tyler just drove, white-knuckled, until the rot smell faded and the radio picked up stations again. Jess transferred schools the next semester. Marco moved in with his mom in another state. Tyler doesn't talk about that night at all. If you bring up Halloween, he changes the subject. I'm the only one who admits it happened. Maybe that's because I'm the one who breathed it in. The burns on my ankles healed into thin, twisting scars, pale lines that curl up my legs like vines. They itch when the weather turns cold. Sometimes in the shower, I swear I see the skin around them bulge, like something is pushing outward, impatient. I didn't plant anything that year. I never have since. But last October, I came home from work and found a small green sprout pushing up through a crack in the concrete, right by my front steps. Just a weed, I told myself. Just random. I bent down to pull it. The stem was thicker than it should have been. Slick, warm. It snapped in my fingers and released the faintest puff of dust, right into my face. I heard my name again. Not loud. Not a chorus this time. Just a single, familiar whisper, curling up from the soil and the broken stem and the cracks in my own skin. Nate! Sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up and the house will be so quiet it feels like the world stopped. And under that silence, if I hold my breath, I can hear something else. Faint rustling, like roots pushing through dirt, like vines growing in the dark, heading somewhere, looking for a road sign that says Pumpkin Rot RD. I make my money off things people don't believe in. Urban legends, abandoned hospitals, ghost towns, most haunted roads in America. If there's a grainy YouTube video and a Reddit thread arguing in the comments, I've probably been there, shooting long exposures and selling prints to people who like to hang fear on their living room walls. That's how I found Hollow Creek. I first read about it in a buried blog post, one of those black background, white text sites that looks like it hasn't been updated since 2009. There was a paragraph that stuck with me. An old mining town up in the hills, depopulated after a cave-in. Every Halloween, people claimed, a parade still marched down the main street at midnight. No one living was there to organize it. The details changed depending on the retelling. Some said it was the ghosts of miners in soot-covered uniforms. Others said it was a children's costume parade that never ended. Kids in paper masks and sheet ghosts looping forever through a town no one remembered. But there was one thing every version agreed on. If you took a picture, they would see you. Which, of course, made me want to take a picture. So that Halloween, while everyone I knew was getting drunk in cheap costumes, I loaded my gear into my car and drove 3 hours into the dark, following a set of coordinates someone had posted in a forum and half a dozen conflicting directions. The farther I got from the interstate, the quieter the world became. No more streetlights, no more gas stations. Just the thin ribbon of road, my headlights, and the shapes of pines pressed like a black wall on both sides. It was cold enough that my breath fogged the windshield. The dashboard clock said 10:43 p.m., plenty of time. I told myself I'd find the town, set up, and catch whatever pathetic local prank passed for a ghost parade out here. Maybe some bored kids in thrift store masks. I didn't feel scared, just focused. It's funny how normal everything feels before something breaks. Hollow Creek wasn't on any of my apps. The GPS map turned into a blank grid and then, eventually, nothing at all. I drove using a printed screenshot of the area and a red circle someone had drawn around a cluster of pale lines. When I finally saw the rusted sign, my headlights flashed across it so fast I almost missed it. Hollow Creek ELEV, 3,912. There was nothing below that. No population count, no slogan, just bullet holes and flaking white paint. The arrow pointed down a narrow, cracked road that angled off into the trees, more broken than paved. I turned. The tires thumped over potholes, rocks popping under the tread. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. Tree branches laced overhead, blocking out the sky. My headlights became the only light source, illuminating trunks, tangled underbrush, and the occasional glint of broken glass. The town appeared all at once. One second it was trees, the next it was buildings. A main street lined with old brick and wood front shops, a few two-story houses, a small brick church with a collapsed steeple. Everything sagged. Windows were broken or boarded up. The paint on the storefronts had peeled off in long curls, leaving gray skeletons of words across the glass. I rolled to a stop near what had once been the general store. The silence settled in the car with me, heavy and tangible. No crickets, no distant traffic, just the soft tick of the cooling engine and my own breathing. The air outside looked colder. I could see a faint mist drifting low along the street, hugging the ground. When I cut the engine, the darkness pressed closer, thick and weighty. I sat there for a minute, fingers resting lightly on the camera bag beside me. I tried to frame it in my head the way I always do. Long exposure of the empty street, maybe a shot of the broken church, angle up to catch the sky. Spooky, sure, but nothing I hadn't done before. The clock on the dash read 11:31 p.m. I stepped out of the car. The cold hit me like an open palm. It wasn't the sharp, clean kind of cold from high up in the mountains. This felt damp and heavy, the kind that seeps straight into your clothes, into your bones. It smelled like wet wood and old stone, with a faint metallic tang underneath, like rusted pipes. My boots crunched on gravel and broken glass. Each sound seemed louder than it should have, bouncing off the shop fronts and coming back to me a half-second later. I popped the trunk, pulled out my tripod and camera, slung my bag over my shoulder. No wind. The mist curled around my shins when I walked, as if the town was breathing on me. I set up in the middle of the street, right where the cracked yellow line used to be. From there, I could see all the way down to the church, its doors hanging crooked, its broken bell tower jagged against the sky. The windows in the surrounding buildings were just black rectangles cut into darker shapes. I focused, framed, clicked off a couple test shots. The shutter's mechanical snap sounded too sharp in the stillness. 11:46 p.m. There was no clock anywhere, but I felt a waiting. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the town was a lung full of air right before an exhale. I checked my watch again. 11:52. 8 minutes until midnight. Come on, I muttered under my breath, more to myself than anything else. Show me what you've got. Behind me, down the side street, something clinked softly, a metallic tap like a spoon against a pot. I straightened, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Not random. A rhythm, slow and deliberate, moving closer. I turned my head, but where the sound should have been, there was only the spill of my tripod's shadow across the street. The mist thickened, turning the spaces between buildings into pale, swirling curtains. My fingers felt colder on the camera body. The metal bit into my skin. 11:58. The first thing I saw wasn't a ghost. It was a lantern. It swung into view at the far end of the street, bobbing gently, its light a dull, yellowish glow trapped inside dirty glass. For 1 second, my heart jumped at the thought of another person. Some local coming to yell at me for trespassing. Then I saw the hand holding it. The fingers were too thin. That's what my brain snagged on. Not the pallor, not the way they seemed slightly translucent around the edges. Just that they were long and narrow, like someone had stretched them. They gripped the lantern handle tight enough that the knuckles stood out, sharp and wrong. The arm rose out of the mist, attached to a shoulder, attached to a body stepping slowly into view. Costume, I told myself automatically. Just a costume. It wore a suit. Old-fashioned, dark, frayed at the cuffs. Across its chest hung a faded sash, the kind you'd see on a grand marshal in a small-town parade. The words on it were worn down to pale strokes. The head above the suit was covered by a mask. Some kind of old-timey papier-mâché face, painted features melted and smeared by time and weather. The eyes were just dark pits, the mouth a drooping line. It walked with a slow, measured step, boots clicking on asphalt in steady time. Behind it, more lights appeared. Lanterns, candle stubs, jack-o'-lanterns held in skeletal hands, their carved faces warped and drooping. A line of figures emerged from the mist, stretching down the street. Children in ripped bedsheet ghosts, skirts dragging. Women in long dresses and lace gloves. Men in suspenders and bowler hats. All of them wearing masks. Masks that had melted with age. Faces blurred like wax left too close to a flame. Eyes turned to empty smears. Mouths sagging, features sliding off in soft streaks. They walked in pairs, in groups, in clusters, a whole town's worth of faded people marching in perfect silence. No footsteps, no murmurs, just the faint rustle of fabric and the soft clink of lanterns. My skin prickled. The air felt thicker, the cold wrapping around my ribs, squeezing. I lifted my camera. Through the viewfinder, the scene sharpened. The lanterns flared brighter. The masks, if anything, looked worse. Like someone had smeared a finger down each face, blurring it mid-scream. The bodies beneath them weren't quite solid. A little too smoky at the edges, like overexposed film. Holy shit! I breathed, not realizing I'd said it out loud. My finger pressed the shutter. The sound snapped through the air like a gunshot. The parade stopped. Every figure froze mid-step. The Grand Marshal with the lantern halted so abruptly the flame inside swung violently, casting wild shadows across the warped faces behind him. Then, in one slow, synchronized motion, they turned their heads toward me. Every mask, every blurred, melted face. Lantern light struck 100 featureless ovals, and yet I felt them looking right at me. It was a physical sensation, like being pinned in place by 100 ice-cold fingers. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then they started walking again. Not forward, toward me. The parade broke its neat lines. The figures shifted, adjusting their path, their silent march narrowing like a funnel. All of them angling down the street toward where I stood behind my tripod. The Grand Marshal led, lantern held a little higher now, the sash across his chest dragging light like a knife. Behind him, the blurred faces seemed to waver, features sliding a little more with every step. I could hear something now. Not voices, not words, just a soft, wet sound, as if wax were dripping in slow, steady drops. Fight or flight finally kicked in. I grabbed the tripod with both hands and yanked, nearly tipping the camera into the street. The metal burned my fingers with cold. I didn't bother collapsing the legs. I just dragged the whole thing backward, boots slipping on damp asphalt. The parade's pace didn't change. No one broke into a run. They just kept walking, inexorable. A tide of old costumes and melting faces. The mist clung to my ankles as I staggered to the car. My keys felt clumsy in my shaking hand. The remote chirp of the lock sounded obscenely bright in the silence. I risked one last glance. They were closer than they should have been. Distances weren't behaving properly. They seemed to stretch and compress with each blink. 1 second they were halfway down the street. The next, the Grand Marshal's lantern light was touching the hood of my car, casting my own shadow back over me, long and distorted. Behind him, I caught glimpses of details. A girl's dress patterned with little blue flowers, dark stains blooming across the fabric. A man's shirt front ripped open, a jagged hollow where his chest should have been. A child's paper mask half fused to skin, edges peeled up like burned plastic. Their faces, though, remained blurred. Even inches from my eyes, the features wouldn't resolve. It was like my brain refused to focus on them, sliding off again and again, leaving only impressions. Eyes that might have been too wide, mouths that might have been open too far. The car door handle was ice under my palm. I wrenched it open, shoved my gear in, half fell into the driver's seat. My breath came in short, white bursts. The first figure reached the front of the car. They didn't try to block me. They didn't touch the hood or claw at the doors. They just passed through. The Grand Marshal's lantern flared, and for a moment his blurred head was level with mine, separated only by the glass. I felt something then, a cold pressure against my cheeks, my forehead, my eyes, like invisible fingers pressing in, searching. My vision blurred. I could smell old fabric, damp with time, dust, smoke, click, the sound of my own camera, buried in the bag at my feet, snapping another photo all on its own. That broke the spell. I twisted the key. The engine roared. The car lurched backward, tires squealing on wet asphalt. I slammed it into drive and shot down the street, the parade parting around me without ever speeding up, cloaks and skirts and sashes drifting in my peripheral vision. In the rearview mirror, the town receded into a smear of shadows and pinpricks of lantern light. The parade didn't chase. They just kept marching, looping, turning, as if my presence had been just another detail in their endless route. By the time I hit the main road, my hands had stopped working properly. I had to pull over a mile down, put my head between my knees, and breathe until the stars faded from my vision. I didn't look at the camera that night. Not on the drive home. Not when I dumped my gear by the door and fell into bed fully clothed. I told myself I'd imagined it. That exhaustion and suggestion and a weird fog in an abandoned town had done what the internet wanted them to do. By morning, I almost believed it, until I opened the memory card. The first shots were normal. An empty street, broken buildings, my tripod shadow. Then came the parade. In the photos, the figures were sharper than I remembered. Not crisp exactly, but there. Rows and rows of masked people in old Halloween costumes, their outlines dense against the air. Their faces were still wrong, smeared streaks where features should have been. But in the stillness of the image, I could see more. The blur wasn't random. It twisted, spiraled, forming shapes that made my head ache if I looked too long. Almost like their faces had been stirred with a spoon, features swirled together into loops and whirls. My own reflection stared back at me from the computer screen, pale and wide-eyed. Then I got to the last shot. I knew it was the last because I hadn't taken it. The timestamp was exactly midnight, down to the second. It wasn't a picture of the street. It wasn't a picture of the parade marching toward me. It was a picture of the parade marching away. Down the center of the frame, in the middle of the blurred, costumed figures, was someone in a dark jacket and jeans, camera strap across her chest. Her head was turned slightly to the side, as if listening. In place of her face, the blur twisted tighter, spiraling inward, pulling everything around it. Her posture was mine. Her clothes were mine. Her camera was mine. The Grand Marshal walked a few steps ahead of her, lantern held high. Around them, the figures marched on in perfect silence. Underneath the image, the file name had changed from the automatic numbering my camera usually used. 3 words had replaced it in plain lowercase letters: Hollow Creek Parade. There was a second version of the same photo, timestamped 1 year from that night. Same figures, same lanterns, same melted masks. And there I was again, a little closer to the front this time, my blurred face turned directly toward the camera. I haven't been back to Hollow Creek. I don't think I need to. Every Halloween, as midnight gets closer, my phone buzzes once, even if it's in airplane mode, even if I've turned it off. When I check, there's always one new image in my gallery. No sender, no file size, just a picture of that same street, those same figures, and somewhere among them, a woman who looks like me, marching. Each year, my blurred head turns a little more toward the viewer, toward wherever I happen to be when midnight hits. And when I close my eyes now, sometimes I feel the rhythm of footsteps under my own, echoing up through the floorboards, like I'm already in line, just waiting for the rest of me to catch up. I didn't go to Pinefall for ghosts. I went because a lawyer with a tired voice told me I'd inherited real property and contents from a grandfather I barely remembered. A few acres of land, a small cabin, and whatever was inside. No siblings to split it with, no cousins to argue. Just a key in a manila envelope and a set of directions to a town I thought was a typo. Pinefall? I'd asked him over the phone. Used to be a postal hub long time ago, he said. I could hear papers shuffling, the clink of a coffee mug. The town's basically gone now, but the cabin's outside city limits, so you're the owner. Congratulations, I guess. I took a long weekend and drove up. The farther I got from the highway, the more the world narrowed. The two-lane road turned to cracked asphalt, then a strip of concrete with grass pushing up through the seams. Pines crowded closer, branches knit overhead like fingers. My cell service dropped from 3 bars to 1, then to nothing at all. It was late October. The air had that thin, brittle edge that hints at winter. Frost crusted the shaded parts of the ditches. The sky was a flat, colorless gray that made the trees look even darker. The first sign for Pinefall was half buried in weeds. Faded green metal, white letters peeling. Pinefall, U.S. Postal Town, EST 1912. Someone had spray-painted a line through the words Postal Town years ago. Rust ate at the edges. An arrow pointed down a side road that barely deserved the name, more dirt than gravel. I turned anyway. The cabin came before the town. A squat shape of weathered wood off to the right, set back from the road behind a stand of pines. It had a small porch, a metal chimney, 2 dark windows like closed eyes. The key the lawyer had mailed me fit the lock with a stiff turn and a squeal from the hinges. Inside, it smelled like dust and old coffee. Light pushed through the grimy windows in weak, smeared rectangles. There was a couch, a table, a sink with a hand pump. A narrow hallway led to a bedroom and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. Everything was covered in a thin film of neglect. I could feel the cold through my jeans when I sat on the edge of the bed. No photos, no framed memories. Nothing to tell me who my grandfather had been out here. What there was, though, was paper. Stacks of it. Bundles of envelopes tied with twine on the table. A cardboard box under the bed full of letters with broken seals. An old canvas mailbag slumped in the corner like a dead animal. Every surface had some little drift of paper, as if someone had been sorting and organizing and then just stopped. I picked up a handful. The envelopes were yellowed but thick, good stock, the kind no one uses anymore. The addresses were written in careful, looping script. The names meant nothing to me. Harold Quince, Box 4, Pinefall, W.A. Marjorie Bell, 18 Miller Street, Pinefall. To the occupant, 2nd floor, 7 Avery Lane. The return addresses were all the same. Pinefall Post Office. No stamps, no postmarks, just the words dead letters in red ink in the corner of some of them. I told myself I'd deal with it later. I dropped my duffel on the bed, opened the windows a crack to let the stale air bleed out, and tried not to think about how many people had handled those envelopes before me. Outside, the day hadn't moved much. The sky was still the same dull gray. The trees still crowded close. My car sat alone on the dirt turnout, already dusted with pine needles. The quiet was almost complete, broken only by the occasional creak from the cabin as the wood shifted. I thought about just staying, making a pot of coffee on the ancient stove, sleeping early. But the sign on the way in had kept poking at me. Postal Town. And all those letters. Curiosity has always been my flaw. That's what I tell myself, anyway. Makes it sound less like a death wish. The road that continued past the cabin led into Pinefall proper. It was maybe a 10-minute walk. Less if you didn't stop to listen. I did. Every few steps, I'd pause, waiting for some sound. Cars, birds, wind, anything. Nothing responded. just the dry, papery hiss of pine needles rubbing together overhead. The town appeared with no warning. One moment it was trees. The next, the woods opened up around an intersection of cracked pavement and sagging buildings. A row of storefronts huddled on one side. A diner with shattered windows. A barber shop with its red and white pole leaning at an angle. A hardware store with its letters rusted away. And at the end of the row, like a punctuation mark, the post office. The words United States Post Office, Pinefall, WA were carved into the stone lintel above the door. The glass was intact, but opaque with grime. 2 metal newspaper boxes stood beside the entrance, their fronts gaping open and empty. The door was unlocked. The smell hit me first. Paper, dust, and something else beneath it, like old glue and damp earth. The air was cooler inside, a basement sort of chill that settled into the joints. My footsteps echoed too loud on the tile floor. Rows of metal P.O. boxes lined one wall, tiny brass doors with slotted windows and little keyholes. Most of them were closed. A few hung open, doors bent or broken, revealing darkness inside. Against the opposite wall stood a long wooden counter with a slot in the middle, the kind clerks lean through to take your packages. Behind the counter, through an open doorway, I could see shelves. They were full. The letters in the cabin had just been the overflow. Back here, the walls were floor-to-ceiling grids of pigeonholes, each stuffed with envelopes and packages in no particular order. They were crammed in sideways, upside down, stacked on top of each other, jammed so tight the paper bowed and ripped in places. Some bundles had fallen to the floor, forming drifts of parchment on the scuffed linoleum. My footsteps softened as I stepped into that room. The air was denser there, heavier with the smell of ink and time. My fingers brushed over a shelf as I passed, raising little clouds of dust that glittered in the thin light coming from the high windows. Every envelope had an address, not all to Pinefall. Some were to neighboring towns, some to big cities I knew well. All of them looked old, pre-zip code old, with state abbreviations written out. The ink had faded to gray, the pencil to faint ghosts. I picked one at random. To Mrs. Eleanor Klein, care of Holloway Boarding House, Pinefall, WA. No stamp, no return address. Someone had stamped undeliverable and dead letter in red across the front. One word over the other. The paper under the ink was wrinkled, stained darker, as if it had gotten wet and dried again and again. There had to be thousands of them. I tried to imagine the amount of life caught in these rooms. Arguments never finished, apologies never read, love letters, bills, news, secrets. Words meant for people whose houses no longer stood, whose names meant nothing. I almost missed it. At the far end of the back room, tucked into a slot by itself, was an envelope that didn't match the others. The paper was too bright, too clean. The edges were sharp, not feathered. There was no dust on it. It was addressed to me, to Daniel Clark, Pinefall Cabin, outside town limits. Where the stamp should have been, there was a little inked circle with the date. My date, yesterday's. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold, except for the tips of my fingers, which tingled as if I'd stuck them in a socket. I told myself someone had to be playing a joke. Some distant cousin messing with the city guy. Some local who'd seen my car and had nothing better to do. But the writing was neat, old-fashioned. The kind no one uses anymore. The loops on the D and C matched the ones on the envelopes in the cabin. I recognized it without knowing why. My grandfather's hand. I'd seen it once on a birthday card when I was 6. The flap wasn't sealed, just tucked in. The room seemed to tilt a little when I slid my thumb under it and pulled the letter out. There was only one line inside. Don't stay past sundown. My first reaction was ridiculous irritation. Not fear. Just that sudden, stubborn anger that comes when you realize someone thinks they know better than you, even from beyond the grave. Seriously, I muttered. That's it. No explanation. No story about why. No, you're in danger. No, I'm sorry. Just a command. Like I was a kid again being told when to come home. I folded the letter back into the envelope and shoved it into my jacket pocket, more forcefully than necessary. In the front room, through the dirty glass, the sky looked Different. Grayer. Flatter. The light had shifted without me noticing, slipping from afternoon to late. Time had moved faster inside the post office. My watch said 4:37 p.m., but the way the shadows stretched outside made it feel closer to evening. I thought about the drive back, the narrow road, the way trees swallowed the light. I thought about the cold cabin, the stacks of letters, the long night with no service and no one nearby. Don't stay past sundown. Could have been a coincidence. A stupid old note written decades ago. A joke between my grandfather and some postal buddy, tucked away and forgotten. I told myself that 3 times. On the 4th, my throat felt dry. I left the post office with my jaw tight, shoes crunching on scattered gravel. The air outside felt a little colder than before, the mist creeping in around the edges of the street. The buildings loomed, their windows blacker now, like holes punched through paper. I walked faster. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had turned the color of bruised fruit, purple sinking into blue. The pines around the clearing were silhouettes. Frost was already forming on my car's windshield. Inside, the cabin felt smaller. The piles of letters seemed to have grown, although I knew they hadn't. Shadows bled into the corners, making the edges of furniture fuzz and smear. I turned on the single overhead light in the main room. It buzzed, dim, painting everything in sickly yellow. My breath fogged a little. The cold was seeping in. I took the letter from my pocket and laid it on the table. The words looked the same in this light. Same neat script. Same date. Don't stay past sundown. Too late for that. I made coffee on the stove, more for the warmth of having something to do than because I wanted it. The cabin creaked every time the temperature shifted. Somewhere in the walls, something small skittered briefly, then went still. Outside, the wind started to pick up, rattling the bare branches against the roof. The sun slid away. I didn't see it go. There was no view of the horizon. I just realized all at once that the thin wash of light at the edges of the curtains had vanished. The windows were black now, reflecting the interior back at me. That's when I heard the first footsteps. They were faint at first, so faint I thought it was the house settling. A soft, measured thump on the porch boards. Then another, and another. Slow, patient. I set my coffee cup down carefully. The ceramic clicked against the table. The sound seemed too loud. The footsteps reached the door and stopped. Silence. Then a knock. Not a frantic pounding. Just a polite, deliberate tap tap tap. 3 knocks. Exactly spaced. I didn't move. Probably a tree branch, I whispered to myself, even though I knew there was no tree close enough to hit the door. Animals. Wind. Across the room, the old mail slot in the front door rattled slightly. It was a simple brass rectangle, the kind you see in old movies, with a little flap that could lift to let envelopes through. It had been painted over at some point, dulling its shine, but the edges were still sharp. The flap lifted with a soft metallic scrape. Nothing came through, just a slice of night air and the smell of cold earth. My skin tightened, the hairs on my arms rose. Then the scratching started. Came from everywhere at once. Fingernails or claws or something. Dragged along the wood of the door, the frames of the windows, the boards of the porch. Not frantic. Testing. Mapping. A skittering, scraping sound that circled the cabin, up to the back door, around to the bedroom window, back to the front. Underneath it all, I heard something else in the distance. The creak of hinges. The slam of old doors in the town. The faint, echoing thump of many feet on wooden floors. Pinefall was waking up. The mail slot clinked again. Something heavy slid against it from the outside, pressing against the flap but not quite forcing it. I watched it twitch, rise a fraction of an inch, fall, rise again. Whoever or whatever was out there was holding something up to it, trying to push it through. A letter. I knew that with the same deep certainty you know when someone is staring at the back of your head. It wanted to deliver something. Don't stay past sundown. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. My palms were slick. I could have gone to the door, yanked it open, called out, but every cell in my body screamed no. The word wasn't a thought. It was a reflex, wired into my spine. so I didn't move. I sat there, watching the slot, while the scratching and footsteps and faint town noises rose and fell in waves. Sometimes the sounds came close enough that I could pinpoint them, right under the window just on the other side of the wall. Sometimes they receded like a tide drawing back. Once, something leaned against the door so heavily the whole frame shuddered. The light flickered. "Go away," I whispered, though I had no idea who I was talking to. At some point, time blurred. Minutes stretched. The sounds became a constant background, a pattern my brain tried to normalize. Scrape, step, tap, creak, over and over. And then, finally, they stopped. Not all at once. In pieces. The scratching faded first. The footsteps receded. The porch boards settled. In the space that followed, the silence roared. I realized my jaw hurt. I'd been clenching my teeth. The mail slot was closed. I stayed where I was for a long time. When I finally stood, my knees popped. The floorboards were cold under my feet, even through my socks. I took 3 slow steps toward the door, each one louder than the last in the quiet cabin. Up close, the wood around the mail slot was different. Hundreds of tiny lines marred the paint, radiating out from the brass, as if something with many fingers had been tracing and retracing its shape. The slot itself was still. No air came through, no sound. On the inside rug, directly beneath it, lay an envelope. White, clean, new. My hands shook as I bent to pick it up. The paper was cold. My thumb left a faint smear of sweat. The front was blank. No address, no stamp, no handwriting. Just empty. I turned it over. Across the sealed flap, in that same precise, old-fashioned script, someone had written 2 words. Too late. The room seemed to tilt again. A slow, nauseating shift. For a second, I thought I was going to be sick. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't open it. Couldn't. That envelope is still on the table in front of me as I tell you this. The letters in the cabin haven't moved, but sometimes, when the light hits them just right, I think I see new ones in the pile. Fresh white among the yellow. Angles of paper that weren't there before. I keep telling myself I'll drive out at first light. Leave the cabin. Leave Pinefall. Never look back. But the clock on the wall is stuck at the same time it was hours ago. The hands haven't moved. My phone screen stays on 12 a.m. every time I check it, no matter how long I sit here. Outside the window, the woods look different. Closer. And beneath the quiet, if I really listen, I can hear a faint, steady sound coming from the direction of town. Like someone sorting letters. Like envelopes sliding into slots. Like footsteps pacing, waiting for the next delivery. I used to make fun of people who said they brought something back with them from a location. I run a small urban exploration channel. Nothing crazy, just abandoned malls, forgotten hospitals, the occasional crumbling farmhouse. We follow the rules. Don't break in, don't vandalize, don't steal. Take only video, leave only footprints. The scariest thing I dealt with before this was a raccoon in an elevator shaft. Then we went to Blackwater. It started the way these things usually start for us. A DM. Love the channel, the message said. If you want a real lost town, look up Blackwater, off Route 19. Used to be a company town in the 50s. Nobody lives there now. Perfectly preserved Halloween decorations. It's like they froze mid-October and never thawed. Locals don't go. They say Halloween never ended there. No name, no follow-up. Just a pin dropped on a satellite map. I should have ignored it. But perfectly preserved Halloween town might as well be SEO bait injected directly into my brain. We were already planning a Halloween special. This sounded like the thumbnail and title handed to us from the algorithm gods. So on the last weekend of October, I packed the gear into my car and headed out with 2 friends. Mark, who handles B-roll, and Kayla, who does the on-camera hosting half the time. I usually stay behind the lens. We hit Route 19 around noon. By 2 p.m., we'd left most of civilization behind. Gas stations gave way to scrub and fields, then to patchy forest. The sky was bright but thin, that washed-out autumn blue that never feels as warm as it looks. It's gonna be a bust, Kayla said, feet on the dash, scrolling through her phone even though we'd already lost signal. Some old cul-de-sac with 2 busted pumpkins and a keep out sign. Then we film the sign, pretend we got chased off by locals, and call it a cursed town, Mark said from the back, half serious. Red circle on the thumbnail, done. I laughed, but my hands tightened a little on the wheel. The turnoff wasn't marked. We almost missed it. The only reason we didn't was because the pin in my offline map started drifting off the road. I slowed, squinting through the pines, and saw the gap. An old asphalt lane, almost completely swallowed by leaves and dirt. This is it? Kayla asked, leaning forward. According to the internet, yeah, I said. I pulled in. Leaves crackled under the tires. The branches overhead knit together, dimming the light. The further we went, the more the air changed. It got colder, quickly, the kind of cold that feels damp, like it's seeping through your clothes instead of hitting your skin. The smell changed too. You know that particular October mix? Wet leaves, wood smoke, a hint of distant candy? Blackwater didn't smell like that. It smelled like old cardboard, plastic that's been sitting in a dusty attic for decades, and underneath, something faintly sweet and stale, like candy corn left in a bowl too long. Guy wasn't kidding about forgotten, Mark said, filming through the cracked window. This road hasn't seen a snowplow in 10 years. We rounded a bend, and the trees suddenly fell away. Blackwater sat in a shallow bowl of land, a handful of streets wrapped around a little central square, maybe 20 houses, tops, a church, a brick school with broken windows, a few storefronts with faded awnings. Power lines still ran between the poles, but they sagged, lifeless. And everywhere there were decorations. Orange and black streamers drooped off porch rails, unbroken but sun-faded. Cardboard witches and black cats, the kind you used to see in old photos, grinned with cracked faces from windows. Paper lanterns shaped like pumpkins hung under eaves, not moving even in the slight breeze. A row of cutout ghosts flapped lazily along a picket fence, their eyes rubbed almost blank. Jack-o'-lanterns sat on stoops and along the curb. They weren't rotten. They weren't fresh either. The flesh looked like wax. Slightly shiny, slightly too smooth, mouths and eyes carved in simple triangles and toothy grins. Holy crap, Kayla breathed. It's like a movie set. I rolled to a stop at the edge of the square. My camera sat heavy in my lap. For a second, I just took it in. The static perfection of it. The way everything looked posed. Waiting. Okay, I said. More to cut through the silence than anything else. We shoot in a loop. Intro on the main street, B-roll of decorations, then we pick 1 or 2 houses to walk through. We're losing light, so keep it moving. We stepped out of the car into air that was at least 10 degrees colder than it had been on the road. My breath puffed white. The smell of old plastic and dust was stronger now, riding under a faint tang of rust. The town was utterly, unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, no distant highway hum, just the crunch of gravel under our boots and the soft whir of Mark's camera. Kayla walked ahead, flipping her beanie down over her ears, tucking her hair inside. I watched her shoulders square as she slipped into host mode. "What's up, everyone?" she said to the lens, voice low but steady. "It's Kayla from Night Sight, and tonight we're someplace the internet swears you shouldn't be after dark. This is Blackwater, a forgotten company town where Halloween never ended." I panned slowly away while she talked, catching a panoramic shot of the square. A 1950s sedan, all rounded edges and chrome, sat at the curb, its windows fogged from the inside. A plastic skeleton dangled from a lamppost on the corner, joints held together with yellowed twine. This grin was wide and simple, molded in one piece. The plastic skeleton on the lamppost? The next time we glanced up, it hung over the entrance to the square instead, arms angled outward, like it was welcoming us in. "Okay, seriously, guys," Mark said eventually, voice tight. "One of you is screwing with me. You're moving stuff when I'm not looking." "None of us have left each other's sight," I said, which was true and somehow worse. The light was going fast. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the cracked pavement. The decorations seemed to soak up what was left of the sun, their oranges and blacks deepening while everything else went flat and gray. "We have enough," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Let's get one interior shot and bail." The nearest house had a sagging porch and a wreath on the door shaped like a grinning ghost. The door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting. Inside, the air was stale and intensely cold. My exhale hung in the beam of my flashlight. Dust motes drifted, thick as snow, disturbed by our steps. Someone had gone all out on decorating this place in the 50s. Paper bats on the walls, streamers across the ceiling, a plastic cauldron filled with petrified candy on the table, its wrappers fused together. On the far wall, a cardboard skeleton with jointed limbs hung crookedly, one arm raised in a half-hearted wave. "Get a shot of that," I whispered. Mark did. We panned slowly across the room, catching the little details. A party banner that read "Happy Halloween." In faded block letters, a stack of paper cups with jack-o'-lantern faces, a record player with a warping vinyl still on the turntable. We turned to go. The cardboard skeleton's arm was down now. Both arms hung straight at its sides. "Nah," Kayla said softly. "No. Nope." She pushed past us, heading for the door. Mark and I followed, our boots thudding too loud on the boards. The house seemed to lean in as we left. Outside, the square felt fuller. That's the only way I can say it. Like the space between the decorations was thinner. Like if you reached out, your hand would brush not just air, but the edge of someone standing very still. "We're done," I said. "Let's just." Every string of paper ghosts lining the square lifted at once. No wind, no sound. They just rose, an inch or two, like something underneath had taken a breath. I pointed the camera at the car, at something normal, anything else. My hands were shaking so bad the frame jittered. We walked as fast as we could without running. Running felt dangerous, like it would trigger something that was still deciding what we were. As we passed under the lamppost at the edge of town, I couldn't help it. I glanced up. The plastic skeleton hung directly above us now. Its molded jaw was open wider than it had been when we arrived, teeth bared in a frozen scream. Tiny fracture lines ran from the corners of its mouth up into the skull, as if something inside had pushed too hard, too fast. For a second, I swore I saw eyes behind the plastic. Not sculpted ones, real ones, glazed and furious. Then we were past it, at the car, doors slamming, engine roaring louder than it should have in the stillness. No one spoke until Blackwater vanished behind the trees. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Normal things, traffic, editing schedule, what we'd order for takeout. Thin conversation, stretched over the shared decision to pretend we hadn't just watched the set of a town subtly rearrange itself around us. It wasn't until that night, sitting alone in my apartment with the memory card in my laptop, that the real horror started. First, everything looked how I remembered it. Intro, panning shots, close-ups of decorations. The scarecrow in the yard, the jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, the lamppost skeleton. The weird movements were there too if you scrub back and forth. Jumps, shifts, tiny discontinuities where a cutout moved between frames without anyone touching it. Then I paused on a wide shot of the square, somewhere around the halfway mark. There were people in it, not us. They stood among the decorations, frozen mid-movement. A woman in a full skirt and cardigan, her hand outstretched toward a bowl of candy. A man in rolled-up shirt sleeves, head turned like he'd just heard something. A child in a clown costume, arms mid-swing, face painted into a grin that looked too stark in the drained light. Their mouths were open, not smiling, screaming, but there was no sound, no motion, just the caught shapes of it. The strain in the tendons of a neck, the whites of eyes too wide, the curl of fingers mid-reach. I scrubbed back. In the raw footage while we were there, those same spots were occupied by decorations. A plastic ghost, a cardboard cutout, a scarecrow. On playback, they were people. Shot after shot, it was the same. Every prop we'd filmed had a second version in the footage, an overlay like the town was double exposed. Decorations in one layer, citizens in another. Their last living moments burned into whatever Blackwater had become. In each clip, the living layer looked a little more faded. A little more like the decorations we saw. Like they were congealing into that plastic and cardboard forever. I was shaking so hard I had to brace my wrist against the table. Then I got to the shot in the house, the one with the jointed cardboard skeleton. On our original camera screen, it had been just that. Faded printed bones, goofy skull, one arm raised. On my laptop, sitting alone in the dark, that skeleton was a man. He was thin, half-starved, his skin hugging his bones too tight. He wore a suit that hung off him in wrinkled lines, like a scarecrow's clothes. His arms were pinned to his sides by some invisible force, every muscle straining. His jaw hung open, eyes bulging. His fingers were curled into claws. He was looking directly at the lens. I slammed the laptop shut so fast the screen whited out. I told myself I'd imagined it. That editing at 3 in the morning had finally broken me. When I finally forced myself to open the laptop again, I skipped ahead past the house, past the square, all the way to the last clip, the one Mark had taken as we were leaving, walking toward the car. It was shaky, catching glimpses of Kayla's shoulder, my jacket, the decorations lining the edges. Nothing I hadn't seen, until something caught my eye in the lower right corner of the frame. A figure. It stood a few feet behind us, slightly out of focus, as if the camera had tried and failed to lock onto it. It wore my jacket, my jeans, my beanie, the exact outfit I'd had on that day. But where my face should have been, there was a blur. Not the kind you get from motion. A smear, a swirl, like someone had wiped their thumb across wet paint, dragging features sideways into a vortex. The shape of a mouth was just barely visible, open impossibly wide. I scrubbed back. The same figure was there earlier in the clip, farther away. I scrubbed back further into other shots. There I was again, standing in a doorway while the camera faced the street, looming in the reflection of a window we'd walked past, half hidden behind a tree. In every case wearing my clothes, always facing the lens, always with that blurred hole where a face should be. I checked the timestamps. That impossible version of me had been in the footage from the moment we stepped into Blackwater. And every time the clip progressed, every time we moved deeper into town, the figure got closer, sharper, like something coming into focus. I haven't uploaded the video. I told Mark and Kayla the files were corrupted, that we lost everything. They were angry, sure, but more relieved than they'd admit. None of us has mentioned going back. I tried deleting the footage. Came back. New files appear in the folder every few days now. Short ones, grainy, labeled with dates that haven't happened yet. When I open them, they're always of the same street in Blackwater, same decorations, same frozen people. And somewhere in the frame, sometimes far, sometimes near, is that figure in my clothes. The blur where its face should be is smoothing out. Lines are forming, hints of eyes, a mouth. Features settling like wax cooling into a mold. Last night's clip was only 3 seconds long. In it, the camera faces a window of one of the houses. The glass is so dirty it barely reflects. But I can see enough. The decorations behind me aren't plastic anymore. They're people mid-scream. My blurred-faced double stands among them, right at the center of the frame. Its features are almost fully visible now. They look like mine. And it's still there, behind the glass, long after the clip ends. Impossible, I know, but I feel it. I see it when the monitor goes black. My own face, just slightly off, staring back at me from the dark like I've been caught on the wrong side of the screen. Halloween's next week. I keep telling myself I won't open the next file when it appears. But I know I will. Part of me thinks that when that other me finally steps fully into focus, I'll see something behind him. Behind me, a whole town of frozen, screaming faces, decorations forever. Part of me already feels the cold plastic of a mask settling over my skin. Like somewhere in Blackwater, there's a brand new figure on someone else's footage. Wearing my clothes, standing very, very still. I've always trusted maps more than people. People get turned around. They swear a road used to be there, a town used to stand past that line of trees, a gas station sat right on that corner, until you go looking and find nothing but weeds and cracked concrete. Maps don't argue. They just show you what's there. At least that's what I thought before Ravensridge. I do solo hikes when life gets too loud. Nothing extreme, old fire roads, forgotten logging trails, the kinds of places you can still reach in a couple of hours from the city if you're willing to lose cell service and deal with bad signage. That October, work had been a mess. My apartment felt too small, and every notification sound made my shoulders tense. So I printed out a topographical map someone had posted in an old forum, loaded up my pack, and headed for a stretch of state land I'd never walked before. The plan was simple: park at the trailhead, hike a loop that followed an old service road, camp for a night, and be back by Sunday afternoon. Nothing heroic, just trees, silence, and the crunch of leaves under my boots. The first few hours were exactly that. The air had that sharp, clean edge of late fall, just enough bite to wake you up every time you drew a breath. The forest smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves, sweet and sour at the same time. Sunlight came down in broken columns through the thinning canopy, painting patches of orange and gold on the ground. I walked, I listened, I relaxed. I didn't notice when the trail faded. It happens sometimes. Foot traffic drops off, the path softens at the edges, and suddenly you're more or less guessing. You rely on instinct, on the map, on the way the land slopes. Except my instinct had decided, apparently, that downhill meant away from where you started. By late afternoon, the light had shifted from warm to watery. The sky between the branches was a pale bruise. I stopped on a rise, checked my map, and felt a cold, slow knot form in my stomach. The little blue line that marked the creek should have been on my right. I could hear water. On my left, I drifted, not by much, maybe a mile or two, but enough that my neat loop had turned into a question mark. My phone was a dead rectangle in my pocket. No bars, no GPS. I told myself it was fine, that I'd correct course, find the road, maybe camp nearer the car than planned. I adjusted my direction and kept moving, trying not to fixate on the way the light kept draining out of the woods. As the trees thinned, another sound bled in under the wind. Music. Faint at first, so faint I thought it was in my head. A tinny, warbling melody, almost like something from an old cartoon. Faded, came back, faded again. Under it, I could just make out a voice, low and steady, like someone talking into a microphone a long way away. I stopped walking. The forest settled around me. The music was definitely real. Came from ahead, somewhere beyond the next dip in the land. I remember thinking irrationally that I'd started hallucinating from stress. There was no way there was a radio out here. No way a station signal would be strong enough this far from anything. The song cut out mid-note. Static crackled, then cleared. A voice came through the trees. Warm, cheerful, hollow. "Good evening, night owls and lost souls," it said, smooth as if it had rehearsed the line 1,000 times. "Happy Halloween from your friends at WRVN, Ravensridge Radio, where the night's always young, and there's always room for one more. Welcome to Ravensridge, population. One more." The hairs on my arms stood up in a wave. I don't know why I followed it. Curiosity, relief at the idea of any human structure, the hope buried under everything else that where there was a radio, there might be a road. I crested the rise and saw the town. Ravensridge was small. 2, maybe 3 blocks of squat brick buildings, a row of houses with peeling paint, a water tower that leaned slightly like it had lost the will to stand straight. No cars, no people, no movement, and at the far end of the main street, a narrow building with a faded sign above the door. Ravensridge Community Radio. A thin metal antenna rose from the roof, wired to a lattice of smaller poles. The music drifted from somewhere inside, richer now, the edges clearer. A Halloween oldie, theremin and horns, the kind my parents used to play at parties. The smell changed as I stepped off the tree line and onto cracked asphalt. The forest's damp, organic scent faded under the dry, dusty smell of abandoned buildings and old wiring. The air felt different too. Still cold, but sharper, like stepping into an air-conditioned room from outside. My boots echoed on the empty street. No wind, no birds. Just the music and, under it, that same voice I'd heard in the trees, talking low, like it was inside someone's car. I crossed the sidewalk and put my hand on the radio station door. The metal was warm. Shouldn't have been. The air was close to freezing. The building cast a long shadow across the street. But under my palm, the handle felt like it had been touched recently, as though someone had just let go. The door opened easily. Inside, dim emergency lights glowed above the hallway, casting everything in a strange, soft red. The carpet under my boots was thin and rough, worn down in the center of the hall from years of shoes. The air smelled like dust, stale coffee, and that particular tang of electronics that had been running too long. On the left, a window looked into the booth. The on-air sign above it shone a steady red. Through the glass, I could see the studio. Desk, microphones, shelves of CDs and records, foam on the walls. A turntable on the counter spun slowly, the record on it crackling softly. One of the microphones was lowered, angled toward the empty chair. The chair was empty, the headphones hanging from its back gently, almost imperceptibly, swayed. And remember, the voice said from the ceiling speakers, if you've just joined us, you're right on time. There's no such thing as late in Ravensridge. Only early, only eager. I swallowed. My throat felt tight, suddenly dry. Hello, I called, forcing my voice to carry. Is someone here? For the first time since I'd stepped into town, the music stopped. The record kept spinning. The needle stayed down, tracing silent grooves. But the sound cut off like someone had hit mute. In the booth, the swivel chair turned a fraction of an inch. Not a full spin, just enough for the back to face me more directly, its fabric worn where someone's shoulders had rubbed it thousands of times. The DJ's voice chuckled softly over the speakers. Well, would you listen to that, folks? It said. We've got ourselves a live one. I took a step back from the glass. Sorry, I called louder. I got lost. I just need directions back to the main road. Static answered me. Then, underneath it, the faintest whisper of words, like someone talking into their hand. I realized my breath was coming too fast. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted half an inch closer. The mic on the stand in the booth tilted down, as if someone had leaned in. Well, you heard them, didn't you, Ravensridge? The DJ purred, voice suddenly intimate, like it was right behind my ear. They're lost. I turned away from the window and walked, faster than I meant to, down the hall. An office with overturned chairs. A tiny kitchen with a coffee pot full of tar-black liquid that had turned to sludge years ago. A back door that opened onto a narrow alley. Cold air slammed into my face, shocking and clean. My hands shook as I dug my walkie-talkie out of my pack. I carry one on long hikes, more out of habit than real expectation of reaching anyone. Out there, it's usually just a dead weight. I thumbed it on anyway. The little red light blinked to life. Static hissed softly. Anybody out there? I said, my voice too loud in the empty alley. This is Daniel Cross. I'm near an old town called Ravensridge. I'm lost. Does anyone copy? For a moment, it was just static. Then the hissing thinned. Another sound slid in beneath it. Breathing. Slow, steady, close enough that I could almost feel it on my ear. A familiar cadence rolled in next, layered over my own words, echoing back faintly. Daniel Cross, near an old town called Ravensridge. The DJ laughed softly inside the walkie, the sound distorted by the tiny speaker but unmistakable. Crystal clear, Daniel, it said. We've got you loud and clear. The alley walls pressed in. My mouth tasted metallic. My fingers spasmed on the plastic. I just need the direction to Route 9, I forced out. If you can tell me which way. You already took the right turn, the voice crooned. You walked straight into us. Why walk away now? Something banged, distant but unmistakable. A door slamming, another, and another. Like somewhere in town, buildings were waking up, exhaling. I didn't wait. I clipped the walkie back to my strap with fumbling fingers and walked out of the alley onto the street. The on-air sign in the front window glowed brighter now, red bleeding into the gray. I didn't look at it again. I picked the line of trees where I thought I'd come in and headed for it, boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The town felt different behind me, fuller, like there were people standing just inside every dark window, faces pressed to the glass, watching. "Folks," the DJ said in my ear, through the walkie I hadn't touched, "our special guest thinks they can leave before the show's over. Isn't that adorable?" The trees swallowed the street. Dry branches reached down like fingers, scraping my jacket, scratching my neck. The forest smell rushed back in, earthy and wet, but there was something else under it now. Hot dust from overheated tubes, the ozone tang of old electronics. The voice didn't fade with distance. It got clearer. "You know, Daniel," it said softly, dropping into a conspiratorial murmur, "we've been waiting for you a long time. Signals get lonely with no ears to crawl into." I walked faster, following the slope of the land, the vague memory of where I'd come from. The light between the trunks dimmed a little more with each step. My chest burned. My legs felt hollow. "Just keep going," I told myself. "It's just tricks. Old recordings bouncing around. You'll hit the road. You'll hit the road." The walkie hissed. My own voice crackled out of it, warped and delayed. "Welcome to Ravensridge," I heard myself say. "Population. One more." The DJ chuckled. "Perfect," it said. My foot hit gravel instead of leaves. I stumbled out of the trees onto a different road than the one I'd taken in. Wider, straighter, the kind that actually saw traffic. A strip of faded yellow lines ran down the center. A battered guardrail crouched along the far side. Relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. I turned to orient myself, to see which direction the trailhead might be. That's when I saw the sign. It stood by the tree line I'd just emerged from, newer than the others I'd passed that day. The wood was clean, unstained. The paint on the letters was fresh enough to shine. "Welcome to Ravensridge Population 1. The metal numbers on the little hanging panel below it clicked. I heard it as clearly as if someone had flicked it with a finger. Click. The 1 turned. The 2 rolled into place. Behind me, in the trees, speakers hidden somewhere I couldn't see crackled to life. My own voice came out of them, warm and cheerful, carrying into the dark like a promise. "Good evening, night owls," it said. "This is Daniel at WRVN, Ravensridge Radio, where the night's always young, and there's always room for one more." I've always trusted maps more than people. People get turned around. They swear a road used to be there, a town used to stand past that line of trees, a gas station sat right on that corner, until you go looking and find nothing but weeds and cracked concrete. Maps don't argue. They just show you what's there. At least that's what I thought before Ravensridge. I do solo hikes when life gets too loud. Nothing extreme, old fire roads, forgotten logging trails, the kinds of places you can still reach in a couple of hours from the city if you're willing to lose cell service and deal with bad signage. That October, work had been a mess. My apartment felt too small, and every notification sound made my shoulders tense. So I printed out a topographical map someone had posted in an old forum, loaded up my pack, and headed for a stretch of state land I'd never walked before. The plan was simple. Park at the trailhead, hike a loop that followed an old service road, camp for a night, and be back by Sunday afternoon. Nothing heroic. Just trees, silence, and the crunch of leaves under my boots. The first few hours were exactly that. The air had that sharp, clean edge of late fall, just enough bite to wake you up every time you drew a breath. The forest smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves, sweet and sour at the same time. Sunlight came down in broken columns through the thinning canopy, painting patches of orange and gold on the ground. I walked. I listened. I relaxed. I didn't notice when the trail faded. It happens sometimes. Foot traffic drops off, the path softens at the edges, and suddenly you're more or less guessing. You rely on instinct, on the map, on the way the land slopes. Except my instinct had decided, apparently, that downhill meant away from where you started. By late afternoon, the light had shifted from warm to watery. The sky between the branches was a pale bruise. I stopped on a rise, checked my map, and felt a cold, slow knot form in my stomach. The little blue line that marked the creek should have been on my right. I could hear water. On my left, I drifted. Not by much, maybe a mile or two, but enough that my neat loop had turned into a question mark. My phone was a dead rectangle in my pocket. No bars, no GPS. I told myself it was fine, that I'd correct course, find the road, maybe camp nearer the car than planned. I adjusted my direction and kept moving, trying not to fixate on the way the light kept draining out of the woods. As the trees thinned, another sound bled in under the wind. Music. Faint at first, so faint I thought it was in my head. A tinny, warbling melody, almost like something from an old cartoon. Faded, came back, faded again. Under it, I could just make out a voice, low and steady, like someone talking into a microphone a long way away. I stopped walking. The forest settled around me. The music was definitely real. It came from ahead, somewhere beyond the next dip in the land. I remember thinking irrationally that I'd started hallucinating from stress. There was no way there was a radio out here. No way a station signal would be strong enough this far from anything. The song cut out mid-note. Static crackled, then cleared. A voice came through the trees. Warm, cheerful, hollow. "Good evening, night owls and lost souls," it said, smooth as if it had rehearsed the line 1,000 times. "Happy Halloween from your friends at WRVN, Ravensridge Radio, where the night's always young, and there's always room for one more. Welcome to Ravensridge population. One more." The hairs on my arms stood up in a wave. I don't know why I followed it. Curiosity, relief at the idea of any human structure, the hope buried under everything else that where there was a radio, there might be a road. I crested the rise and saw the town. Ravensridge was small. 2, maybe 3 blocks of squat brick buildings, a row of houses with peeling paint, a water tower that leaned slightly like it had lost the will to stand straight. No cars, no people, no movement, and at the far end of the main street, a narrow building with a faded sign above the door. Ravensridge Community Radio. A thin metal antenna rose from the roof, wired to a lattice of smaller poles. The music drifted from somewhere inside, richer now, the edges clearer. A Halloween oldie, theremin and horns, the kind my parents used to play at parties. The smell changed as I stepped off the tree line and onto cracked asphalt. The forest's damp, organic scent faded under the dry, dusty smell of abandoned buildings and old wiring. The air felt different too, still cold, but sharper, like stepping into an air-conditioned room from outside. My boots echoed on the empty street. No wind, no birds, just the music, and under it, that same voice I'd heard in the trees, talking low, like it was inside someone's car. I crossed the sidewalk and put my hand on the radio station door. The metal was warm. Shouldn't have been. The air was close to freezing. The building cast a long shadow across the street. But under my palm, the handle felt like it had been touched recently, as though someone had just let go. The door opened easily. Inside, dim emergency lights glowed above the hallway, casting everything in a strange, soft red. The carpet under my boots was thin and rough, worn down in the center of the hall from years of shoes. The air smelled like dust, stale coffee, and that particular tang of electronics that had been running too long. On the left, a window looked into the booth. The on-air sign above it shone a steady red. Through the glass, I could see the studio. Desk, microphones, shelves of CDs and records, foam on the walls. A turntable on the counter spun slowly, the record on it crackling softly. One of the microphones was lowered, angled toward the empty chair. The chair was empty, the headphones hanging from its back gently, almost imperceptibly, swayed. "And remember," the voice said from the ceiling speakers, "if you've just joined us, you're right on time. There's no such thing as late in Ravensridge. Only early, only eager." I swallowed. My throat felt tight, suddenly dry. "Hello," I called, forcing my voice to carry. "Is someone here?" For the first time since I'd stepped into town, the music stopped. The record kept spinning. The needle stayed down, tracing silent grooves. But the sound cut off like someone had hit mute. In the booth, the swivel chair turned a fraction of an inch. Not a full spin. Just enough for the back to face me more directly. Its fabric worn where someone's shoulders had rubbed it thousands of times. The DJ's voice chuckled softly over the speakers. "Well, would you listen to that, folks?" it said. "We've got ourselves a live one." I took a step back from the glass. "Sorry," I called louder. I got lost. I just need directions back to the main road." Static answered me. Then, underneath it, the faintest whisper of words, like someone talking into their hand. I realized my breath was coming too fast. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted half an inch closer. The mic on the stand in the booth tilted down, as if someone had leaned in. "Well, you heard them, didn't you, Ravensridge?" The DJ purred, voice suddenly intimate, like it was right behind my ear. "They're lost." I turned away from the window and walked, faster than I meant to, down the hall. An office with overturned chairs. A tiny kitchen with a coffee pot full of tar-black liquid that had turned to sludge years ago. A back door that opened onto a narrow alley. Cold air slammed into my face, shocking and clean. My hands shook as I dug my walkie-talkie out of my pack. I carry one on long hikes, more out of habit than real expectation of reaching anyone. Out there, it's usually just a dead weight. I thumbed it on anyway. The little red light blinked to life. Static hissed softly. "Anybody out there?" I said, my voice too loud in the empty alley. "This is Daniel Cross. I'm near an old town called Ravensridge. I'm lost. Does anyone copy?" For a moment, it was just static. Then the hissing thinned. Another sound slid in beneath it. Breathing. Slow, steady, close enough that I could almost feel it on my ear. A familiar cadence rolled in next, layered over my own words, echoing back faintly. "Daniel Cross, near an old town called Ravensridge." The DJ laughed softly inside the walkie, the sound distorted by the tiny speaker but unmistakable. "Crystal clear, Daniel," it said. "We've got you loud and clear." The alley walls pressed in. My mouth tasted metallic. My fingers spasmed on the plastic. "I just need the direction to Route 9, I forced out. "If you can tell me which way." "You already took the right turn," the voice crooned. "You walked straight into us. Why walk away now?" Something banged, distant but unmistakable. A door slamming. Another, and another. Like somewhere in town, buildings were waking up, exhaling. I didn't wait. I clipped the walkie back to my strap with fumbling fingers and walked out of the alley onto the street. The on-air sign in the front window glowed brighter now, red bleeding into the gray. I didn't look at it again. I picked the line of trees where I thought I'd come in and headed for it, boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The town felt different behind me, fuller, like there were people standing just inside every dark window, faces pressed to the glass, watching. "Folks," the DJ said in my ear, through the walkie I hadn't touched, "our special guest thinks they can leave before the show's over. Isn't that adorable?" The trees swallowed the street. Dry branches reached down like fingers, scraping my jacket, scratching my neck. The forest smell rushed back in, earthy and wet, but there was something else under it now. Hot dust from overheated tubes, the ozone tang of old electronics. The voice didn't fade with distance. It got clearer. "You know, Daniel," it said softly, dropping into a conspiratorial murmur. "We've been waiting for you a long time. Signals get lonely with no ears to crawl into." I walked faster, following the slope of the land, the vague memory of where I'd come from. The light between the trunks dimmed a little more with each step. My chest burned. My legs felt hollow. "Just keep going," I told myself. "It's just tricks. Old recordings bouncing around. You'll hit the road. You'll hit the road." The walkie hissed. My own voice crackled out of it, warped and delayed. "Welcome to Ravensridge," I heard myself say. "Population. One more." The DJ chuckled. "Perfect," it said. My foot hit gravel instead of leaves. I stumbled out of the trees onto a different road than the one I'd taken in. Wider, straighter, the kind that actually saw traffic. A strip of faded yellow lines ran down the center. A battered guardrail crouched along the far side. Relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. I turned to orient myself, to see which direction the trailhead might be. That's when I saw the sign. It stood by the tree line I'd just emerged from, newer than the others I'd passed that day. The wood was clean, unstained. The paint on the letters was fresh enough to shine. Welcome to Ravensridge Population 1. The metal numbers on the little hanging panel below it clicked. I heard it as clearly as if someone had flicked it with a finger. Click. The 1 turned. The 2 rolled into place. Behind me, in the trees, speakers hidden somewhere I couldn't see crackled to life. My own voice came out of them, warm and cheerful, carrying into the dark like a promise. "Good evening, night owls," it said. "This is Daniel at WRVN, Ravensridge Radio, where the night's always young, and there's always room for one more."